Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 10 of our reading of Guinevere by Sharan Newman. Part 10, I believe. I'm just going to check and make sure really quick. Yes, I just confirmed that it is indeed part 10. So, anyways, first of all, as always, we're going to go over the copyright information. This is a large print copy of the book that I got from a library book sale. It is copyright 1981 by Sharan Newman, and I do have written permission to read this on my channel. Anyways, in our last episode, or the last part, Guinevere came back home after being away at the Hermitage. She met the unicorn, and there was some So anyways, Guinevere is supposed to learn how to run a household now and stuff like that. And it looks like Kate, C-A-E-T, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but it looks like Kate is trying to be a knight. He's practicing and stuff like that, so. We're going to start right here. Soon the rains, soon the rains did come, and the household withdrew into the warm villa. The outside would disappear, or was seen only through sheets of water falling from the porch roofs. All activity was moved inside, and Guinevere remembered that the time had now come for her to learn those boring household tasks. Gwendolyn tried to make it as pleasant for her as possible. The women and girls all sat together and laughed and talked as they carded or spun or sewed. But although Guinevere dutifully ran the spinning wheel until her fingers blistered and her back ached, she was not with the others. She was wandering in the forest, listening to the wisdom of a fantastic creature. She was feeling the smooth coolness of his horn and the strange patterns in its colors made in the sunlight. She was remembering the peace and perfect contentment she had felt on that summer day. Guinevere loved best to work in the kitchens, where the herbs were dried and made into possets and flavorings. The wild scents helped her fantasize, and she could almost feel them under her feet as she ran. When the others only saw her sitting at the table, crumbling the leaves in her hands. Her dreams that winter were no longer vague. She was sure that the unicorn was with her then, listening to her wanderings. Gwendolyn had hoped that the two of them could grow closer during those dismal weeks, but she perceived that once that Guinevere was with them all only in body. She never laughed or commented on the stories they told. When she was spoken to, she would start and then smile gently at the speaker, asking her to repeat herself. Gwendolyn shook her head. It was no use. She tried to remember if she had been this way at 13. It was certainly an introspective time. Perhaps when she was older, there would still be time to talk together. There were so many things Guinevere didn't know. Snow fell by the winter solstice, and even though Guinevere had intended to stay awake to see where Flora went, she found that after her usual bedtime hot drink, her bed looked so warm and comfortable that she just couldn't stay out of it any longer. So she snuggled down into the warm blankets and never discovered whether or not her brothers had told her the truth. And one day, late in March, when the wind howled and the trees were still bedraggled with the remnants of last year's leaves, there was the joy of an unplanned visit from Matthew. The Odegrants had not thought to see any of his sons again before summer, and the spring invasion had been checked. "What brings you all the way back here?" he asked. "It's not to say we aren't glad to see you. There is nothing wrong, is there?" No, of course not," Matthew answered heartily. "I was bored stiff with all the training and decided I needed a week with my family, nothing more." His eyes drifted from his father to the group of faces behind, fosterlings, maids. He seemed to be searching for someone. Leodegrance was no fool, nor did he pry. "It's good to see you, son. You can fill me in on the preparations they are making for the invasions this year. Where does Arthur think the worst attack will come from?" Matthew made some answer that Leodegrance didn't hear. He had seen the boy's eyes light up and tried to follow them without being noticed. There were several girls there, but only one looked his way, Rihanna. Rihanna? How unlikely. Why, the child hardly spoke at all. Matthew's style was hardly a shy thing like this. Still, there was a glow on her face that was unmistakable. "Well," thought Leodegrance, it wouldn't be a bad match. I'll have to discuss it with Gwendolyn." Amazing. No one had ever seen how that shy face could come alive, or known how softly Matthew could speak. The week was over too soon for everyone, and he rode away again. Guinevere watched until he disappeared. Of all of them, she was the only one whose thoughts were not on him. Her mind was reaching far into the forest, calling. Chapter 8. As the spring days lengthened and the earth dried, activity quickened at the villa. People blossomed out into the fields and woods, planted, visiting, building, or just traveling for the sheer joy of being out. Guinevere began to watch for Giraldus, even with her dreams. The winter had been dull for her. The talk of the fosterlings and maids revolved around beauty, secrets, and gossip. Her thoughts were all of her unicorn. So she had little real communication with the others. They, however, never resented her or thought she was snubbing them when she neglected to join in their talks. They shared the common belief that Guinevere belonged apart from everyone else simply by right of her existence. They never expected her to be like them, so there was no animosity. Still, Guinevere was lonely and longed to be out again. All winter the unicorn had only been a shadow on her wall and a whisper in her mind. She yearned to be with it again, to caress its mane and to feel the cool weight of its horn on her arm. She began to fear that she had only dreamed it. She must know the truth. The first day that was relatively warm and dry, she begged to be allowed to go out walking or riding alone. "You are too old to be out alone," Gwendolyn replied. "Get some of the girls to go or have Kate accompany you." She threw the words over her shoulder. She was airing the linen, a job she hated, but the winter dampness was in everything, and all the fine clothes would be ruined if they weren't all taken out piece by piece and carefully dried and scented. "The girls are all busy, or else they won't go out into the sun, and Kate will be helping to clean the stables for the rest of the day. I won't go far, please." She was feeling desperate. Leodegrance hurried by, pulling up his riding gloves. He was going to check up on the sheepfold. Shearing time was coming soon. He saw his daughter's face and paused. "Let her go, my dear," he smiled. "She has been held in the house too long, pinned in by other people. Run off now, Guinevere. Don't stay long, or I'll not give you permission again." Guinevere didn't wait for fear of a change of mind. She hugged him joyously, kissed her mother, and raced away. Gwendolyn frowned. "You shouldn't have let her go. She's almost 14 now. She can't run around unattended in the woods like a child." "She is a child, Gwendolyn. Look at her. You kept her by your side all winter long. She had hardly a moment of her own. Didn't she dutifully stitch altar clothes and oversee the kitchen maids? Let her go by herself for a while. You know as well as I do she'll never be a chatelaine. Household cares are as far removed from her as starlight. I know it's better than you. I know it better than you. Wasn't I the one who had to pick out all her false stitching? And the kitchen maids could have bathed in the kettles for all the attention Guinevere paid them. But I don't care about that. I kept her by me because I wanted to keep her safe. No one will harm her here, Leodegrance answered, but his voice was not assured. I have just heard, he added, as if he had only just remembered it. The Saxons that settled in the southeast last year have started moving north again. They are looting and burning. Cador has been sent to stop them. Really? Gwynlyn answered carelessly. Well, he is a good soldier. I'm sure he will have no trouble. The linen slid from her hand. She picked it up. Aren't you going excuse me. Aren't you going to see the sheep? She asked. Yes, of course. I'll be back late in the afternoon. Don't worry. He kissed her gently and left. Guinevere managed to hold herself to a ladylike walk until she was safely out of sight of the villa. Then she felt the calling, and everything left her mind but the need to be with him. At once, she tore across the field and into the wood, to the place she knew he would be. There, standing motionless in a pool of sunlight, was her unicorn. She stopped a few feet from it and just stared at it. Joy filled her eyes. Then it stepped daintily towards her and bowed its head. She wrapped her arms about the silky neck and again became a part of its timeless world. The rider did not see them as he passed nearby, urging his exhausted horse onward for the last mile. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, and his thoughts were on the job before him. He wore the remnants of a Roman soldier's garb, many generations old. Only the breastplate was in good repair. His cloak was of thick wool, too hot for the weather, and it was caked with mud and torn. He didn't slacken his pace until he was across the creek and at the gate. Then he checked his mount and asked to see Leodegrance. Gone, the sentry told him, looking despairingly at the man's grime. Then take me to your mistress, he snapped. I have come from Cador, and I've not ridden 3 days without sleep to be gawked at by the likes of you. Gwynlyn and Pencerna were in the dining hall preparing the menus and planning seating order for guests when the rider was shown in. Gwynlyn glanced at him quickly, noting his labored breathing and the dust and mud covering his clothes. She wondered why the day had suddenly grown so dark. She couldn't seem to focus clearly. All she could see was the glare of sunlight on his breastplate, searing her eyes and blinding her to everything else. You bring a message from my cousin? The words were cold and brittle and came from far away. The soldier saw a tall, stately woman above him on the dais. Dais? I'll say dais. Dais. She was like a statue before him, calm and aloof and waiting. He shifted his feet. All the way here he had been preparing to speak to Leodegrance, one soldier giving a report to another. That would have been hard enough, but he hadn't been trained for anything like this. He didn't know how to begin. The Saxons, he stuttered, his voice broke, rather. Why did he get all the bad jobs? We fought them 5 days ago, and it was a horrible fight, with all of us strong and rested from the winter. They were a far greater force than last year. Some of their ships must have been missed by the watchers. We didn't expect so many, and finally had to give way. Your sons were fighting in the rear guard. As they should, Gwynlyn nodded. Go on. He had paused again. Gwynlyn didn't move or change her expression since he entered. He didn't want to go on. She stood there before him as if he were telling her it had rained in the north and the crops might be damaged. Why didn't she help him? Gwynlyn couldn't understand at first what he was saying. The light bewildered her. She felt someone move a chair behind her, but she didn't sit. She simply stared at the courier, trying to piece together his reason for being here. Finally, the realization hit her. Which one? She asked sharply. What a stupid question. Did it matter which? Was one son less precious than the others? Would the loss of one of them be a lesser blow? Why was it so dark? Only that horrid reflection glowing from that awful man. His mouth dropped open. Look at her, he thought. The queen, no doubt. Tell me your news, peasant, and let me get on with my work. Then I'll tell her. All of them, my lady, he added. Still, her face didn't change. I see, he said. Tell Cador to make arrangements to have them sent home for burial. I can't, he stammered. It took us 2 days to regain the place. The Saxons had looted and burned the bodies. There was nothing left. There, that was the message. All of it. There was nothing more to be said. Nothing he could give her. All he wanted was to be out of there, away from this cold woman with those terrible eyes. She still hadn't moved, not a finger, since he had entered. A last thread inside Gwendolyn snapped. Not even a shred of them left. Not even a Christian burial next to their ancestors with the proper prayers and Godspeed. Nothing. What was this paper in her hand? A seating list? It fluttered to the floor. "Penserna," she said at last, "give this man some food and a fresh horse, and tell Kate to ready mine. I think I will go riding this afternoon." She walked from the room without another glance. The soldier relaxed with a huge sigh. "And I come here trembling and shaking for fear of telling her, and all she says is, 'I think I'll go riding,'" he snorted. "I'd always heard they raised their sons for their own glory. I believe it now. I've got 5 brothers at home, but my mother would wail over my death as if the sun had gone out. She doesn't even flinch when all 3 go under." Penserna descended upon the man so quickly he didn't know what happened. The butler's face was lined with tears and his voice faltered, but as he spoke, he twisted the cords of the man's cape so tightly that he nearly choked him. "Raven," he rasped. "Birds of doom. Filth. My lady ordered you food and a horse, and for her I shall see that you get them. Then leave this place and never return, or your mother will most certainly wail." He released the terrified rider and sent him to the kitchen with a servant. Then he raced out to the stables as fast as he could. The news had sped before him. Kate was leaning against Matthew's new colt, sobbing loudly. Penserna gripped his shoulders as gently as he could. "Kate, you must help me. Ready a horse for the Lady Gwendolyn at once. Then you must take the swiftest horse we own and ride it as fast as you can to find Leodegrance and bring him back. You will have to tell him why. Can you do this?" Kate nodded. Penserna released him with gratitude. He knew the boy would find the necessary strength. That relieved his mind on one count. Now he must hurry. The sound of horror and grief echoed through the villa like a wave spreading outward, spilling, rolling down the hill and out across the fields. In the whole house, only Gwendolyn remained silent and dry-eyed. She had walked to her room. She saw no one as she passed. She sat on the edge of her bed and carefully picked up her riding shoes. She wrapped the linen around her legs and then laced the shoes over it, watching the leather thongs cross in cheese up her calf. Cheese? "Christos," she thought. "It makes no sense." There was a great force inside pushing outward, hunting for escape. She must go quickly. She pulled on her gloves and went out to the courtyard. No one dared stop her. Kate stood there with her horse. His face was smeared, but he was holding his tears back. He put out his hands to give her a lift up. She took the reins from him and started to put her foot into his cupped hand. Then, just for a second, she seemed really to see him. Her face softened, and bending, she kissed his cheek. He jumped back, startled, and then turned his face away, so she couldn't see. He knew now why Penserna wasn't going to Leodegrance himself. He watched her go and then ran back to the stables. Penserna was waiting. "Has she gone?" "Yes, through the gate just now." Penserna patted his back. "Good lad. Now, you know your job. Don't let your grief slow your pace. You are the best rider in the compound, and you must prove it today. Leodegrance must be here when I return. I will bring him, through the mumbling sorrow he felt a thrill of pride. He was the one being trusted, not one of the foster sons or men-at-arms, but Kate. Penserna had known that none of them felt as he did, and he had discovered Kate's dream to be like the brothers. He would not fail them. Penserna took another horse, not fast, but sure-footed. He was not a good rider, and he prayed that he could stay on long enough to complete his work. He rode out the gate and across the creek, and then turned sharply, following a newly broken trail into the forest. Gwendolyn didn't notice the watchman at the gate or hear his cry of, "God save us all." She didn't feel the water splashing against the horse's flank and wetting her legs as she crossed the creek. She concentrated on making the horse take her the way she wanted to go, and holding back the thing inside her until she was well away from everyone. Once she entered the forest, she broke off from the main path and let the horse find its own way among the trees and through the underbrush. The awful pushing was at her throat. She swallowed against it, but it was too strong. Suddenly, like a sword thrust into her brain, came the realization. She began to scream. I'm sorry. This kind of reminds me from when my mom died. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble continuing. I apologize. Okay, I'm better now. It was like no sound that she had ever made before. It was a deep and inhuman, a primal retching force of the anguish within. I'm going to power through this. I'm sorry if it isn't very good. Okay, I'll try to continue. My children, my babies, she shrieked as she slid from the horse. The words were indistinguishable, long drawn-out sobs of words. She fell to her knees and clutched the ground with her hands, her fingers digging into it and pulling out clods of new grass. She ripped the earth and pounded until she was grimy and bleeding, but the earth didn't notice. All the while her cries poured forth, with scarcely a breath taken. She couldn't stop. She had to kill this horrible pain, to beat it out of herself. She clawed at her chest, ripping her delicate robe and leaving thin lines of blood against her skin. She kicked and screamed and pounded at the uncaring ground until she lay exhausted, beaten, whimpering, and alone. 1,000 years passed. She vaguely felt someone lift her gently and wipe her face, murmuring all the while. She didn't resist. She was still too busy fighting the battle within herself to care what was being done to her body. There was no victory that way. She was lifted further and placed upon a horse. A voice was speaking, but it didn't make sense. Wipe my nose. Please, my lady, hold on for only a moment. I'm too old to steady you while I climb up myself. She slid forward and limply held her arms about the horse's neck while Pincerna got up behind her. Then he gathered up the reins and placed her head and shoulder against his chest. Then he held her with one arm while he tried to guide the horse with the other. Forgive the liberty, my lady, he pleaded. I must get you home. I must take care of you. She nodded. It didn't matter, as long as no one disturbed her from her struggle. They went slowly, Pincerna reflecting with a grim irony that if he were a young man, this would be romantic and dashing. Now he suspected that he only appeared foolish. A branch brushed Gwendolyn's arm as it dangled beside her. Something stirred. Who was this man, Pincerna? Pincerna? Something about Pincerna. He had told her something once, and she had been very sorry, but had forgotten it almost at once. What was it about Pincerna? You lost your child too, didn't you? He sighed. Perhaps he should keep talking, just to keep her from thinking. But this wasn't exactly the story he would have picked. Yes, my lady, all of them. 2 to the winter sickness, 1 to the sea, and 1 more to the Irish raiders. Killed? I hope so. They took her on a slaving run one day when she and 2 friends went out hunting for shells on the beach. I never should have let her go. He was silent for a while. My wife died with 1 more in childbed, and then I was alone with a farm and no one to leave it to, so I just walked away. I would have walked until I died if I hadn't been a Christian. But the hermit who lived on the beach told me I would see them all again if I went on living. But if I took my own life, all hell would part us. I don't know if I believed him, but I couldn't take the chance. So I walked until I came here, and you took me in. A long time ago. Yes, and I don't want to die now, even if I did then. I can wait if I must, to see them. And if you'll pardon me again, my lady, so can you. You can too, rather. I needn't. I see them now, she said, and her voice chilled him. He tried to force the horse to go a little faster. I see all of them. That's what I can't bear. If I could envision them as men, soldiers, who did their jobs and died fighting, I would be able to live with it. But I only see their sweet baby faces, their innocent children's smiles, and feel them ripped from my arms and slaughtered, thrown alive into the flames. Her voice went from a harsh whisper to a shriek, and Pincerna could only hold her fanatically with one arm and pray for help. It came. Leodegrance, followed by Kate, heard her and came. Leodegrance, his face aged and worn, held out his arms for his wife, and she went to them, still wailing softly as if she had forgotten how to stop. He took her home, and the maids who loved her best bathed her and bound her battered hands, and wrapped her in warm, soft blankets, and tried to get her to eat, but she did not seem to understand. So they left her in her own bed, and went away to dry their own tears. Flora wasn't among them. When she had heard the news, she had simply collapsed. She was in her room now, awake, but too feeble to move or even to speak. Sorry, I always have trouble with this word. Tenmontius, Guinevere's teacher, was the closest thing to a doctor they had, and so he was sent for. He listened to the maid's recounting of what Flora had said before she fainted, and gazed for some minutes into her open eyes. Then he ordered a guard set on the door. Her mind appears to have totally gone, he told Leodegrance. For some reason, she blames herself for their death, and the shock of this has brought on a sort of paralysis. She is very old and may not recover. At this point, it would probably be a blessing. Leodegrance waved him away. Take care of her. You know best what to do. Tell me if there is any change. He hurried to be with his wife. Gwynlyn was sleeping now, fitfully with moans and thrashings. Leodegrance sat beside her. For the moment only, a few hours passed. When Kate had raced towards him and had not had a minute to digest what had happened, he could not comprehend yet that his sons were dead. Although a dull ache in his heart warned him that he soon would. He only saw his wife, who had been his strength through years of precarious living, lying helpless and hurt before him. With that in his eyes, everything else was, for the time being, remote. He took her hand, willing her to return to him. The shadows of the bedposts lengthened, and he realized that it was still daylight, barely time for dinner. He pleaded with her to look at him, to waken, to see him instead of the image of her burning sons. Finally, with one great shuddering moan, she opened her eyes and stared at him directly, sanely. But her first words startled him, for they were not what he had expected. "Where is Guinevere?" her voice condemned him. "Lord, where is she?" "Off in the woods? Somewhere." She didn't know. She would come home laughing and find him. Someone must go find her. And with that, we're going to stop that here. We've been reading from Guinevere by Sharan Newman. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information is in the description below. I will say that this book is still for sale at most book retailers, probably. Mainly the big ones, I would say. The trilogy is Guinevere, the Chessboard Queen, and Guinevere Evermore. And whether I'll read the other two on this channel, I'm not sure. I'll have to see if I can procure copies of those books. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.